opening statements, and Ms. Madden will be first.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to the League for your thoughtful and long questions. Did a lot of research. The first time I attended this debate was in 2011 when I was running for the State House against a certain incumbent senator who chose not to be here today. And I remember one of the questions they asked us was, do you support, how do you feel about a woman's right to choose? And everybody dismissed that question. They said, a woman's right to choose, that's not something we have to vote on in the state level. Well, here we are in 2018, and it is something that I voted on in the state level. And we run the risk of, if we don't elect more Democrats, having the 2/3 majority to override Governor Wolf's veto. So not only are we dealing with that in the State House, but in our national and our federal government, we're trying to ram through a Supreme Court Justice nominee who's been alleged to have attempted rape as a 17-year-old, just so that the Republicans can overturn Roe v. Wade. If that doesn't say all you need to know about the state of affairs in our country, I don't know what else does. We can't address poverty in this country. We can't address gerrymandering in this country or in this state. We can't address a living wage or even have a conversation about these things. In the years that I've been running for public office and in the 2 years that I've held public office, we don't seem to be able to have a cohesive conversation about school funding. We're dead last in funding in this country, even though we spend more than 46 other states. And we certainly don't seem to be able to have a conversation about how we help and support our taxpayers who are drowning in property tax debt and losing their homes. The time for us to get together and have a conversation about the things that matter to Pennsylvanians is now. I am bipartisan by virtue of the fact that there's about 40 more Republicans than there are Democrats in the House, and only about 4% of our bills, regardless of whether or not they're good bills, ever come to the floor for a vote. So we need some change, and I think that change is Adam Rodriguez, Claudette Williams, and Tarah Probst, personally, and myself. It's important that we all work together. It's important that we be able to cross party lines and have these conversations. I've been able to do that. I have a bill right now that will make it easier to join a union. My prime co-sponsor is a Republican, represented by the name of Thomas Mahaffey. But we have to fight back and we have to win. We have to fight back against extremists like Daryl Metcalf, who say things, who brag about not voting any bills out of state government because they're Democratic progressive bills. We have to fight against extremists who say, like Daryl Metcalf, who say we should not fund the Poshy schools because they're sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants. We have to fight against Speaker of the House Mike Turzai, who says, hey, deliver the state of Pennsylvania to pass the voter ID bill to deliver the state of Pennsylvania to Mitt Romney, done. There are 1 million more Democrats in the state of Pennsylvania than there are Republicans, yet Republicans have the overwhelming majority in the State House. Gerrymandering, ladies and gentlemen. Daryl Metcalf gutted that bill even though it had 102 co-sponsors. I look forward to the questions that the League has posed, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Yes, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to the League for hosting this event. I was born and raised in East Stroudsburg back in the 70s. Till I was 2, I was the youngest of 3 boys, and then my parents adopted my sister Linda from Korea. And when I was 5, my parents adopted my brother Jim and my sister Joan, also from Korea. So we were a family with 6 children growing up in East Stroudsburg, and it was a great time. Our schools were well funded. Many people were able to live and work and raise a family easily in this area. I never remember hearing about school property taxes as I grew up and graduated high school. I did hear about gas lines, and it's not the natural gas lines you're thinking of. It's when you waited into the gas station to fill up your car. Those are the types of things I remember growing up. But then I went off to college and I worked out of the area in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, in a lumber company for 3 years. And when I came back, that's when you started to hear about property taxes. I came back in '95. Of course, hold harmless was started, a policy that the state began that said no school will ever get less money than they got the year prior. That was started in '91. So there were schools that were losing students out west and in other parts of the state that still got money as if they had them. Meanwhile, our schools were growing, and we had to accommodate that growth. We weren't getting the money for those students from the state, so we raised the money ourselves, and you saw our taxes escalate. Hold harmless was a bad policy. It's impacted our community horribly, and now you're seeing people losing their homes because of school property taxes. So in 2013, as we saw the new seat we were getting in the 115th district, I decided I want to run for state representative so I can go to Harrisburg and fight for school property tax reform, fight to get the school funding formula fixed. And so that's what I did. We had a tough campaign, we ran hard, and we were able to win. And in May of my first year, we passed a school property tax reform bill that would raise the sales and income taxes to offset the school property tax and would have reduced it by 50% average across the state. We sent it over to the Senate, and unfortunately they never took it up. But we did get it through the House. And then I also focused on school funding. The first budget that came up, we had a brand new formula for education funding. Now the governor in the first budget didn't want to use the formula that first year and just send out all the money the old way. And I fought hard to say, look, we need to use this formula. I made up sheets and went around and talked to all the members I could about the importance of using the new formula so our schools would start to get their fair share. And so we did use the formula on new money that first year. And I also began looking at ways to introduce legislation to drive more money. I spoke on the floor and said, look, we got a report here that says our schools are shortchanged by $1 billion. 180 districts at that time were not getting $1 billion that they should get. And yet we were giving money to all the schools. There were 320 schools that were getting more than their fair share. So I stood up against that and introduced legislation that would help drive more money to the schools that should be getting it. And I did that in the appropriations bill back in August. I put those amendments on in the second budget and did it again the next year because that's a very important issue for our area and for me, and so that's what I fought for. Since I've been out the last 2 years, I've seen no legislation getting put forth. There's a couple bills out there, but nobody's really pushing them, and I don't see them in play. Now, right now, we do have a school property tax reform bill. There was a hearing on it a couple weeks ago, but we're almost near the end of the session, and we've seen no legislation and no votes. So I'm running again for state representative so I can go down there and push this issue, get these bills before the House and get votes. So I'd appreciate your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
No applause. So we can have time for everything and we'll move it along in a timely manner. So now we're going to these lengthy lead questions. They're in your program. I'm going to read through them. So the first one is on election reform. Do you support any of the following election reforms for Pennsylvania? Why or why not? A, automatic voter registration, as long as the process adequately addresses concerns over mistakenly registering non-citizens and others who are ineligible. B, abandoning the closed primary system in favor either of the city open or open primary. Either approach would allow electors, regardless of initial registration status, to participate in the primary of the major party of their choice. C, the National Popular Vote Compact between the states, which calls for the elimination of the Electoral College. Or D, measures to make voting more accessible by providing any registered voter with alternatives to casting a ballot in person on the day of a primary or general election. And we started this one with Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Martha. Okay, there's a lot of questions in there. Do I support any of those following initiatives or reforms? Why or why not? Automatic voter registration. I don't support that. I think voters should want to vote, should take the initiative to register to vote. And there are many people out there who don't vote and don't want to vote, whether it's for religious reasons or privacy reasons. They don't want to register. they just don't want to be a part of the process. They love living in this country and participating, and living and working and making and raising a family and so on, but they just don't want to participate in that. So I wouldn't force it on anyone. It's a right that everyone has. They can do that. We should make it as accessible as possible, and we've done that with online registration. And we should continue to make it easier, because I run into people that do want to vote, and we want to get them registered. So I typically have a form with me where I can point them at the website to do that. The closed primary system should be abandoned. In the 115th district, 20% of our voters are independent or other party voters. They're not part of the two major parties. Yet they have to pay taxes to fund these elections that they can't participate in. And that's wrong. So we should look to do an open primary system where everyone can vote. I know my brother lives in Ohio, and in that case, you go in and you choose which party you want to vote in, and you vote in that party every race. There might be others where you can pick and choose who go across, but we should look at allowing everyone to vote in the primaries. And the parties, if they want to put up a nominee, they can fund their own race within their parties to decide who their nominee is going to be. The National Popular Vote Compact, I don't support that. The United States was created as a republic. The founders wisely sought to avoid what they'd seen in other pure democracies, where majority rule becomes tyrannical rule over the minority. The electoral system allows smaller, less populous states to have a say in the presidential election, and we should keep that. Measures to make voting more accessible. Certainly we want everybody to have access to the ballot. We do have a good absentee system. I know many people that use it. If it's not accessible for some reason, we should make it so. But I've yet, to meet anybody that said I could not get an absentee ballot when I needed one. So if there are things, though, that we need to do to make that more accessible, let's do it. But beyond that, I like Election Day. I think it's good that we all participate in this and go to the polls and vote. It's a great American tradition, and a lot can change. You've seen people that do early voting and so on, but things can change in a number of weeks or days that might make you say, well, I would like to change my vote. So I prefer to do as much as possible voting on Election Day. Thank you.
And same question, Ms. Madden?
I do support automatic voter registration, and for a number of reasons. We should be making it easier to vote in our state. We should be making it more accessible for everybody. So it's really our greatest right as Americans to vote. Democracy is a participatory sport. And I encourage everybody to get out and vote on November 6th. So AVR, automatic voter registration, the biggest success we have is when you register, when you get your license, you're asked, do you want to register to vote? And you say yes or no, and you do. Also, we do it in public assistance offices as well. Anywhere and any time that we can register people to vote. If you're registered to vote, you have the right not to vote. That's your democratic right, but at least let's make it easy for you to vote. So absolutely, I agree with automatic voter registration. We also need to make it easier to vote in this state. There's early voting in about 10 different states right now, but not in the state of Pennsylvania. There's voting by mail in other states, but not in Pennsylvania. The bottom line is the Republican Party wins elections and maintains the majority by gerrymandering and voter suppression. The facts bear it out, and it's the truth. So we need to combat that by making it easy for everybody to vote and making it as accessible as possible. I was at a friend's house the other day who has a number of health issues, and you could not believe the questions that they were asking for an absentee ballot application. I was just looking for the line that said, now could you prick your finger and sign right here in blood? Because it's ridiculous. Your doctor's name, his phone number, what exactly are all your ailments? Hey, I can't get to the polls. I want to vote absentee ballot. Send me the darn absentee ballot. I also support open primaries in Pennsylvania. You might get to the polls one one day and say, hey, my state senator has been promising property tax reform for over 10 years now, and he hasn't delivered, but this Democratic candidate, she's got a solution. I think I'm gonna vote for her. People are independent because they want to make independent decisions. We should not be closing them out of the primary system. So yeah, primaries, open primaries enable everybody to be able to vote. And I'm not even gonna go through the other 3 pages. I think that was pretty succinct. The National Popular Vote Compact between the states calling for the elimination of Electoral College, absolutely. Absolutely. The Electoral College is antiquated, and usually it works against the popular vote. I mean, we didn't learn anything from Al Gore. We didn't learn anything from Donald Trump. Could we please start paying attention? It's undermining our democracy. We are in the age of computers, and we get our information instantly, many cases with a tweet, and there's no reason why all of the candidates can't get to all of the voters, and we don't need a body of people to cast a vote after the popular vote. So yeah, absolutely. And measures to make voting more accessible by providing any registered voter with alternatives to casting a ballot in purpose. Yeah, voting by mail has been working in other states, and I think there's no reason why it can't work here as well. And we should definitely start looking into these alternatives, because we need to get, listen, we've got a vast population of people who get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get on that Mart's bus or get into their cars and go to New Jersey and work all day, and they don't get home before the polls close. Let them vote by mail. Thank you.
Okay, the second lead question is regarding voting. The Pennsylvania Department of State mandates that all counties have paper trail type voting machines by the end of 2019. Monroe County has budgeted $3 million for the purchase and maintenance of new machines. The League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania supports a voter verifiable paper ballot or other paper record, that paper being the official record of the voter's intent, and that the voter can verify either by eye or with the aid of suitable devices for those who have impaired vision, that the paper ballot and record accurately reflects his or her intent. Do you support vote by mail, which would eliminate the need for expensive machines? If not, how should the new machines be financed? And we start with Ms. Madden.
Well, yes, I support voting by mail. But I also support people coming out to the polls. You know, it should be a holiday. To be able to go out and vote, you should have the entire day off from work. When I was growing up in New Jersey, we were off on election day. Our school, every school was a polling place, and we got the day off so that our parents could go and vote, and we should look to do that too. We should do everything that we can to make it easier to vote, and we should definitely have a paper trail, because who knows what the Russians have in store for us. They have certainly interfered with Claire McCaskill's race in Illinois. We know for sure they interfered in the presidential race. So yeah, we should have that backup. And the other thing we seriously have to look at is the rolls. I was listening to a news program the other day, and so they're not concerned so much that in Pike County, it was on Channel 13, Pike County was talking about how it's not a computerized system when you go in and vote, so there's no way they can be hacked into. However, we do know that there are forces undermining our democracy that are going in there and just purging thousands and thousands of people from the voter registration rolls, so that when you get there, your name is not in the book. So we really do have to take a closer look at that. And absolutely, I think they should be paid for by taxpayer money. It's our democracy, it's our right to vote. We should be paying to upgrade machines and to put those securities in place. I mean, basically what isn't paid by taxpayer money. But when it comes to voting in our democracy, we should all be willing to spend a few extra dollars to make sure that our democracy is preserved and intact. Thank you.
And Mr. Parker, same question?
Okay. So when I first started voting, I was in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, and we did use a paper ballot. It was kind of like a standardized test. So you just went through, colored in the circle next to the name you wanted to vote for. And so that, and your name's on it, you sign it, and so forth. So you had the paper trail. I thought it took a little while because you had to color in all those circles, but obviously they already had that, and it's not very expensive. Then when I came home, of course, we had the machines with the levers, and those are neat. It's easy. You can pull the straight lever if you want, and then change the ones you want, and lock in the vote at the end. And now we have the similar concept with the electronic ones. But I would support going to a paper system, having a paper trail, and I think it's pretty simple. You just do the paper ballot as I just described, similar to a standardized test, and then you feed it through and it reads it off, and you have it. If you need to audit it, you can just go through one by one and do that. We have vote by mail right now with absentee ballots. I agree we can make that simpler, but that is something that is offered for those who can't get in on election day, and we should make it easier to do absentee ballot voting. And if we want a paper trail, it's pretty simple. You can just print out those and have people come in and fill those out on election day. And then if the power goes out, we just need a flashlight. Thank you.
Okay. The League of Women Voters believes that climate change is the greatest environmental challenge of our generation. It is projected that a warmer and wetter future lies ahead for Pennsylvania, which will result in costly impacts on human health, agriculture, forest resources, hydraulic resources, outdoor recreation, and energy consumption. And that's cited from the Pennsylvania Climate Impacts Assessment from May of 2015. Minority and low-income Pennsylvanians have been forced to bear a disproportionate share of these environmental impacts, cited from the DEP, Office of Environmental Justice. What policies or programs would you support that would both mitigate carbon and methane emissions that contribute to climate change while creating economic opportunity in the renewable energy sector? And we start with Mr. Parker.
Thank you. Well, one of the greatest things about our area is we have an abundance of natural resources that we enjoy and we want to protect. And we have wonderful streams and lakes, and hiking trails and biking trails. And that's one of the greatest things about the Poconos. So we want to be good stewards of that. And I support protecting and maintaining our natural resources. I support policies and programs that would encourage the effective use of energy. Let's encourage efficient use of energy. It was mentioned about capturing methane, carbon. I know the governor has a policy for all new gas wells drilled that are stricter about capturing the methane. I was talking to somebody who works in that industry yesterday and just asking him about this question and what it would take just to simply do that on the current wells. And you'd have to invest in the infrastructure, but ultimately you would be capturing more, and it would result in a more efficient use of the gas that we're getting out of the ground. So we would get more energy from what we're taking already. So the governor could put those standards on the current wells as well. And so I would support doing that. I was speaking to someone last week who just talked about how this is very important to them, and they actually, in their electric bill, they choose an electric provider who generates electricity from wind and solar. So you can do that in your electric bill, and I think the state should have a policy that does encourage that. It at least makes us aware of it. I don't know that everybody's aware of that, but if you can specifically select the type of energies that are going to do that, we should do it. Now also, we did, several years ago, the state had a program to incentivize and help people get into solar and other alternative energy sources. And I have friends that put in solar panels, and we have local businesses that did that. But one of the problems was the electric companies weren't buying their electricity because they could get cheaper electricity that was solar from out of state. Now we had a rule that said, our providers, our producers couldn't sell theirs out of state, but other people could sell into our state. So I supported a bill that would have ended that, and fortunately it did pass in this last session, so that now all those people that made those investments in solar can start to see the benefits of that, and we can actually start to use in our state, and they can sell out of state as well, but they're selling more of the solar energy that they're producing. So yeah, I would support, more programs that would incentivize people to get more efficient with, the automobiles they drive. We should encourage people to get high mileage cars. I drive a Honda Civic, which gets close to 40 miles to the gallon. I like saving money, and so I think that's important. Now, we don't necessarily have a lot of extra money to invest and incentivize people, but perhaps we could do something with tax, with our sales tax structure to incentivize people to buy vehicles and other energy-consuming products so that they use less energy. Thank you.
And Ms. Madden, same question?
From time to time, I pull out this mailer that you may have gotten. I certainly got it at my home from David Parker. And one of the things it says is that since he left, there's been nothing done in the area of pollution. Well, I would like to reassure David and all of you that there are things being done in the area of pollution. I personally have a 100% voting record and have received just this week the endorsement of the conservation voters of Pennsylvania. So every bill that comes up for a vote that works to save the environment and initiate new programs that will help the environment, I vote yes. And I am one of those people. I was actually called a greenie, which was supposed to be an insult at the Economic Summit breakfast, but I took it as a compliment because I very publicly stated that, yeah, absolutely, our water in the Poconos is pristine and exceptional, and it should stay that way. And we don't need to build another water park and downgrade the quality of our water. But I digress. But former Vice President Joe Biden once said that climate change is an existential threat to our future. And I absolutely believe that. And I wish our current administration believed that way. Sometimes when I hear them talk and I think about the bills and the different things they want to eliminate, I think of them more as the Environmental Pulverization Agency. I think time and time again that science has proven that climate change is not only real, but is a serious issue that must be addressed. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to look at the fact that 40% of our CO2 emissions come from coal-powered electricity. And I can pretty much guarantee you that if Scott Wagner is elected governor, it will probably stay that way or increase. In 2014, our state created the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard, which states that local utilities must obtain at least 8% of their electricity from clean renewable sources, such as wind power, solar power, or even forest and agriculture. 8% is a modest number, but it's a start. And in terms of creating economic opportunity, there's still a great deal that we can do. For example, and I'm probably not going to say this name right, there's a Spanish wind company called Gamza, and it established its U.S. headquarters in Philadelphia. They have invested $84 million in our state. They've built 2 manufacturing facilities and a headquarters in our state. They've created nearly 1,000 jobs for Pennsylvania. That's a lot of jobs, that's a lot of clean energy, and we can do more and we can do better. We can embolden our industries to invest in alternative energy and energy efficient upgrades that would not only help reduce CO emissions, but would also cut energy costs. And we did have programs in which we gave rebates for solar and wind power, and we really need to step up that process because people do things when they're incentivized. For example, I know quite a few of my friends who have taken advantage of Tesla's leasing of solar panels. And the return comes really quick, and my one particular friend happily takes pictures and posts on Facebook all of her rebate checks that she gets from having solar power. So why wouldn't any of us do that if it were made affordable? And then the Union of Concerned Scientists did a cohesive study on Pennsylvania climate change and suggested making loans and grants available to support this cutting-edge technology, such as wind turbines and geothermal heat pumps or solar thermal heat pumps could go a long way as well. And in most cases, I'm done. I'm sorry, I'm done. I've got more, ask me later.
The topic is on criminal justice, and this is in 3 parts. A, Pennsylvania is the only state which does not fund public defender offices. Each county funds their own office, which results in great disparity from one judicial district to another. Do you support state funding of public defenders? Why or why not? And if yes, to what extent? B, alternatives to incarceration not only cost less but often result in less recidivism. Do you support any alternatives? C, what other suggestions do you have to make Pennsylvania's criminal justice system more equitable and less costly? And we start with Ms. Madden.
I absolutely support using state funds for public defenders for a number of reasons. About 50 years ago, there was a poor man by the name of Clarence Gideon, and he was forced to represent himself in court because he didn't have the money to afford a lawyer. And he took great exception to this, and he fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. And in their decision, the court ruled that everyone has the right to legal representation, regardless of their ability to pay. Fast forward 50 years later, and Pennsylvania consistently ranks among the worst in the indigent defense system. And it's because the mechanism for funding is county by county. Not only do we not use state funding, but we don't even have state supervision over public defendants, so there's no tangible way of knowing how much effort is being put into each case. I'll read some statistics for you. According to the ACLU, in Philadelphia has the best public defense office in the state, and they spend 9 times more on indigent defense than any other counties per capita. It's impossible for public defenders to do their job when they are overworked and underfunded. And if anybody talks to a public defender or watches Law and Order, we know they are consistently have caseloads this high, and they're running into cases, into courtrooms trying to read up on the case. In 2011, the Government Commission's Task Force and Advisory Committee on Services to Indigent Criminal Defendants issued a report that has unfortunately fallen on deaf ears throughout our state's government. And it was a bipartisan commission. Speaker Turzai was on there, Democrat Representative Mike Hanna was on there. It was a very balanced panel. But what I have found through my research over the years is that most of the commissions that they study, especially in the Corbett administration, were left somewhere in a folder and never talked about again. And it's really a shame because it would have gone a long way. They actually titled it a Constitutional Default, Services to Indigent Criminal Defendants in Pennsylvania. And it provided comprehensive recommendations for fixing the system. And they didn't take up any of them, and they were good, like compliance with the Constitution, composition of Indigent Defense Agency Board, funding, workload, compensation, conflict counsel, full-time counsel, data collection access. Alternatives to incarceration not only cost less, but they reduce recidivism, and we should really be looking to give everybody their due process, and we should be looking to fund public defenders, because we are all, after all, innocent until proven guilty. Thank you.
And Mr. Parker, same question?
Okay, thank you. So in the public defender office, when I read that question, of course, I didn't realize we were the only state, so I decided to ask the county about how funding in general works in our justice system, and if the DA's office is funded by the state. Now, the DA's office does get some funding from the state, but the county still bears a large share of that. If not, in the short time I had, I think most of it comes from the county, but they do get some subsidies from the state. But a few years ago, the County Commissioners Association put forth a resolution that they wanted the state to fund the whole thing, the whole criminal justice system, the courts. I shouldn't say the whole system, but the court system. And that would include, the judges who are paid by the state and their offices, which I understand the county pays for the offices of the judges. And then the DA's office and the public defender office. So that's what the counties would like, and I can see us doing that. Now we are going to have a transition where that's going to have to be paid for. And so our state taxes would go up to fund that, and the county taxes should go down. But nevertheless, if the state takes it over, you'd want to make sure that your county is getting its fair share of that money. So we want to make sure there's a good formula in place and that would adjust based on your needs. So I support definitely looking into that. I want all of Pennsylvania citizens to get a fair trial, to have good representation. And so we need to find a way to fund that so that they get good representation. Regarding alternatives to incarceration, I support alternatives. I mean, we have people in prison who have nonviolent offenses and are in for 10 years because they possess some drugs. I mean, we're wasting money in housing these folks. There's other options we can use, like house arrest. And we do use some things. There's weekend prison. You know, we have offenders who are guilty of drunk driving or something like that. They can often serve in that way, or there's breathalyzer devices you can put on their cars. So I support looking at all ways that we can make our prison system more efficient, make it reduce the recidivism rates, get people back to working and contributing to society and doing it as efficiently as possible. I want all our government systems to work well, to provide the service they should, to protect the public, and do it as efficiently as possible, and get people back involved in our communities. Thank you.
Tax reform and school funding. Please present your ideas to relieve the burden on local property taxes and funding the public schools in Monroe County. What are the obstacles you see to ensure that our schools have equitable funding levels? As a result of a bipartisan effort in 2016, Pennsylvania enacted a formula to equitably distribute state education funding across school districts. But the formula only applies to new funding to the education budget. Do you support applying the fair funding formula to the entire state budget for public schools? And we start with Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Mark. So as I said before, the first thing I did when I went to Harrisburg, I started meeting together with other representatives who wanted to get school property tax reform. And we began meeting in December and continued meeting until up into May. We had a bill before that, and in May we were able to pass a bill that we got enough votes in the House to pass that would have reduced school property taxes 50% across the state. And that's the obstacle you face. There's some people that like their current situation. They're getting more funding than the formula says they should. Their taxes are low, so they don't want to change, and that's your obstacle. But right now, because we've had over 25 years of this, we've created such an imbalance that more people live in the areas that are harmed than the areas that benefit. So democratically, we have the votes. It's just a matter of getting together with everybody and getting those votes. And that's what I strive to do. I went through, when we had the new formula, I did apply it to the whole funding. That was my question. You know, they told us that 320 districts would lose money. I said, well, what about the 180 who aren't getting the money they should? So I applied the formula to the whole budget and went through by each district to determine what representatives would benefit from it, and went to those to get them to support my legislation. And I had some interesting and wonderful conversations. And there's definitely partisanship in Harrisburg. In fact, as I was talking to a fellow Democrat, well, not a fellow House member who was a Democrat, I said, look, here's my plan, here's how it's going to help your schools. And he just looked at me and said, why are you trying to help me? And I thought, well, it's not about necessarily helping you, it's about helping our students all together. It's about working together. So, unfortunately, that partisanship is entrenched on both sides of the aisles, but we're working through it. And I was working across the aisle to get this measure through. So, I do support applying it to the whole budget and then finding a way to drive money to the schools that should be getting it. One of the compromises would be to come up with a fund of $1 billion and say, look, these schools that are getting $1 billion, let's keep it, but take this $1 billion and get the other schools what they should be getting. And then everybody gets what they get, and then work on a transition period. There's a lot of recommendations that came out of that Basic Education Funding Commission. School consolidation, they said we should incentivize school district consolidation. Well, that's not being done. Dealing with hold harmless, this is what I'm suggesting would deal with that. And they have things about school crossing guards, homeless and foster care, student information, trauma, and transiency. These are all things that they recommend we do as well. But it seems like, you know, they put out the recommendations, we have a formula, we're only using it on a very small percentage of the funding for basic education. And we're not getting our schools what they should, or our students and our communities what they should. So that's why I'm running again. That's why we want to go back to Harrisburg, because I was the one putting this legislation out there, fighting for it. I'll never forget when I was in the governor's waiting area for the hall there for an event. I was just waiting for the event to start, and I saw the governor talking to somebody, and then he motioned over to me. So I walked over and he said, you know, this gentleman's from this county and is concerned about school funding. Their school's not getting what they should, and I know that's your issue. So I want you two to meet. So we had a great conversation, and I gained another ally. And that's what I was doing. I was building allies across the state to deal with this. When I was in office, we had a hearing on my bill, and I had a superintendent from Erie County, superintendent from Reading, and superintendent, and the controller from East Stroudsburg. So we were working together as a team to get this issue through, Democrats and Republicans, and that's why we want to go back to Harrisburg to fight for that and get us our fair share.
Ms. Mann.
Okay, so I forgot to answer the second part of the last question, and Martha is graciously going to let me answer it. And that was about what do we do about recidivism? Well, at the point where we are privatizing prisons and penitentiaries and building sports arenas and naming them after them, we have a big problem in this country and in this state. We have the 5th largest population of incarcerated people in the country and the 3rd largest population on probation and parole. So we should really start looking more seriously at drug courts. A drug court is where instead of being incarcerated, you get to pay taxes and have a job and live out in the real world, but you undergo drug testing and you undergo counseling, and you are constantly monitored, but your freedom is not taken away, and we are experiencing very good success rates with that. We also need to stop incarcerating people for non-violent drug offenders. I don't seem to be able to find my words today, I apologize. Which is a real big problem. And then another solution that other states have taken on is the legalization of marijuana. In Colorado, where marijuana is legal, they have found like an 11% drop in motor vehicle accidents. Thank you, Lisa, for that. They are using that money for drug counseling and drug programs, and they are just funding programs that combat, addiction in other areas. So that's another solution. Then, of course, another solution, let's hold Big Pharma responsible for the opioid epidemic. Absolutely. And start using that money to help people, to put people in counseling and put people in therapy so that they can overcome addictions before it gets to the point of going to jail. So now let's talk about property taxes. Dave voted against HB 1552, which was the bill for equitable funding, and then the Republicans didn't fund education at the levels that Governor Wolf asked them to, so that we could achieve adequacy sooner. What Dave did was he proposed HB 2111, which wasn't even considered in committee. That was his funding formula that would have changed the funding formula that the vast majority had just passed, so they wouldn't even entertain it. But there are things we can do about it, and if you go outside in the vestibule, your state representative actually has her tax plan in one of these turnstile things, and she spells it out pretty clearly. And basically it's 50% property tax reduction. I'll tell you why the bill that passed through the House didn't make it through the Senate. And Dave was right in the sense that there are very few counties in the state who have the property tax burden that we have. So why do they want their sales tax to go up astronomically to pay for our property tax reduction when we're not doing the right thing in the first place by funding education at the levels that it needs to be funded at? That's number one. Number two, we cannot burden people with a higher sales tax, and we also know that a sales tax is regressive. So once the economy goes down, so does the revenue. You're not funding $12 billion of education with a sales tax. So that's why 76 doesn't pass, but they still keep pushing it in all its different variations, and the people keep saying no. So what do? Well, we create a 50% property tax reduction by raising the PIT from 3.07 to 3.77, and we make natural gas drillers pay their fair share with an 8 cent per million cubic feet on natural gas. Don't applause, because you're going to get in trouble. And then what we do is we take that $4 billion, and that's what's created, $4 billion, and we fund that money through the gaming formula. What we do when we fund that through the gaming formula is those of us who are underfunded in education, we get more of a tax break than Montgomery County, which is funded at like 61%, and we're funded at 32%. So we're kind of equalizing everything by doing it that way. Thank you.
Yeah, so just so we're clear, if you forget something or another point comes up to you later, if you want to use some of your time, that's fine. I'm just struggling to remember who I start with this time. Dave. Okay, we'll do that. We'll begin with Dave, and Dave will have the first closing statement as well. Okay, so there's a bunch of questions here. We'll get through as many as we can. Okay, so for the first question, tax incentives, I guess it's like, what is your position on? Do you support, talk about tax incentives for volunteer firefighters in all townships in Monroe County? Fire departments need volunteers due to the aging population in fire departments locally. So we'll start with Mr. Parker. Do you support tax incentives for volunteer firefighters? Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Martha. We'll get to that. I need to clear something up so that people understand what we were doing in Harrisburg. And it is true, I voted against the school funding formula bill that we had on the House floor because it wasn't a pure funding bill. I wanted it to be pure in the sense it didn't have special allocations in it. Now this bill had 2 special allocations for 2 school districts that one made them whole and actually gave them the money they would have gotten if we were using the formula. Gave another one twice as much as the formula said they should get an increase in. And so I voted against that because I wanted it to be a pure formula bill. And the date that occurred was one day prior to my hearing on my alternative, which, again, my alternative used the formula, applied it to the whole budget, and then it looked at the schools who were underfunded, targeted most of the money to them. And then because so many different special interests said, well, all schools have to get some more money, I had 25% that went to all the districts, so everybody got some more. But that was a compromise I made to try to get more support. Of course, as it turns out, all the statewide associations still came out against my bill because they're made up of members all across the state, and the majority of the members, even though you might have a school district with 400 kids in it, there's more school districts that don't benefit. But you have another school district like ours with 4,000 kids or larger amounts, and they don't benefit, but they both have an equal say in that association, and so those associations are going to be against us. Now to volunteer firefighters, very important members of our community. I am just amazed when I meet them how much time they devote to keeping us safe and our property safe. And we definitely want to help them because they are having trouble getting volunteers. And Coolpaw Township Volunteer Fire Company is one that's been most progressive, I guess, in getting volunteers. You know, they give free gym memberships to volunteers. That township has decided to give tax incentives to volunteers, and each township and municipality can do that. It doesn't necessarily require anything at the state level for us to do that, but I certainly, if there's anything that hinders them from doing that, I would oppose it. I think they should have the right to say, look, we need volunteers, we need people to do this work. Let's incentivize them to do it. Another thing I think we might want to look at is just, for the county, different people are talking about ideas for a paid fire company that could respond to a lot of different municipalities, and then the local volunteers can support as needed. That's something we may want to look into as well, just so that we know we have the coverage that we need, and people are protected.
And Ms. Bannon?
Yes, I do support tax incentives. As a matter of fact, I voted, we passed a bill to allow municipalities to give property tax reduction. I think it's 20%. I could be wrong. And then it's up to the individual municipality to pass that along to the firefighters. There's other things we can do as well. In Coolpaw Township, as David mentioned, has been progressive in this area. In Coolpaw Township, where I live, we actually fund our fire department. What a novel idea. So instead of having to raise money to keep their own firehouse going while they're volunteering to put out all of our fires, they can just fight fires. And what Coolbaugh Township does is they use that extra time that they have, because now their firefighters don't have to raise the money, for classrooms. They either go to, I don't know, the firefighter school, whatever it's called, and take classes, or they do online where they all sit in the firehouse, and there's an online class lesson. And so they have used this money, and they have applied for grant money to make the Coolbaugh Fire Station an emergency shelter in case of bad weather, and certainly that will upgrade their facility. I know Stroud Township, so we need to provide tax incentives, which we are doing already, but we also need to give the firefighters the tools in which they need to do their job, and that's the latest fire equipment. That's a state-of-the-art firehouse. I know there's this struggle with Stroud Township where they really are desperately in need of a new firehouse, and they would like to model their fire department after the New York City Fire Department, where they live there for 3 days, you know, and they're all brothers and sisters, and they all make meals together, and they all live together, and that way they're not coming from everywhere. And Stroud Township has expressed a desire, or the Stroud Township firefighters have expressed a desire to do that. And I really think that we should support them. So yeah, we need tax incentives, which we do have some in place, but we also need to make sure that we're equipping our firefighters and we're not overburdening them with putting out fires and raising the money for the equipment that they need to do so.
And the next question is the same vein, but it is a different question. So as long as we're talking about this one asks, would you introduce or support legislation that would allow municipalities to tax hotel rooms and entertainment programs to relieve the burden for local services for things such as police, fire, and roads? We'll start with Ms. Madden.
I'm not sure how much of a hotel tax we can impose before it starts affecting our tourism. I did a short stint at the Ramada Plaza Hotel in New York as a front desk manager, and the hotel tax was 19%. And people would come from other states and would come from other countries, and they just couldn't even believe it. I believe we need to give breaks, but I wouldn't do it with a hotel tax, because tourism is one of our biggest industries in the state of Pennsylvania, and we spend far less money on promoting tourism in the state of Pennsylvania than many other states. We used to spend somewhere between $12 and $14 million, and now it's, I think this last budget it was $6 million. So I would use that money if we were ever to raise the hotel tax to put it back into tourism, to promote tourism. Now, Republican colleague of mine by the name of Marguerite Quinn has an excellent bill that I have co-sponsored and I support to tax Airbnbs and HomeAways, because they're not being taxed. And we could use that money certainly to put it back into the tourism industry.
And Mr. Parker?
So yes, I agree with Representative Madden. Our tourism industry is one of our greatest assets in Pennsylvania. People come to visit us, and we should certainly know that in the Poconos, so we don't want to hinder that. But I believe we can raise more revenue from it. Again, I don't know that it should be used for what the question mentions. However, the hotel does pay taxes locally, and their taxes would help fund the local emergency services. So the guests shouldn't necessarily have to pay that, although they do because they can't go there. So that's where the tax revenue comes from. But I support gearing toward money to advertising. I mean, all of us can remember back after the hurricane that really hit New Jersey, all you heard was stronger than the storm, and they were advertising hard to get people to come there. We have people going there instead of coming to the Poconos, and you see a lot of advertising for New York State and other parts of the country. So we do need to advertise for it, and when we do that, we actually generate a lot of money. When someone comes here, it's a great economic engine to get people to come to our area. So we need to encourage more tourism to Pennsylvania, to the Poconos in particular. And I think, too, we should get the credit for what we do. I mean, we get tons of visitors that we bring in from out of state, to the Poconos. All the more reason, and that revenue, we're sending to Harrisburg. And we're not getting our fair share back. So that is another reason we can say, we can quantify that and say, look, this is what we're bringing to the state in Monroe County. We should be getting our fair share for our schools, for our roads, and for the other things we need here in Monroe County. Thank you.
Okay, next question is, when you talk about gas drilling, do you mean fracking? And I guess this could be a short or expounded answer. Mr. Parker, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the unconventional wells is what I would be referring to, which is fracking. And that's one of the things with some of the legislation and regulations that are set up for the unconventional drilling. There's a lot of conventional drilling that still goes on, and the people that drill for regular oil and gas the traditional way are not making nearly the revenue and generating as much oil or gas as the new unconventional way, but yet they're getting treated as if they are. And that's one of the things we want to be sure that we clarify that difference and not penalize those who have minimal impacts. I mean, with the new drilling, you're talking about areas bigger than this library that they're impacting. With the traditional way, it's much different. So we do want to make sure that we understand that there's two different methods and not, punish one because we wanted the other one, which is a totally different system, the unconventional drilling or fracking. We don't want to negatively impact the other part of the industry.
Ms. Ben?
What was the question?
So it simply asks, when you talk about gas drilling, do you mean fracking?
Yes, we do. We mean natural gas drilling. We are one of 14 states that has an abundance of natural gas, and we are the only state in the country that does not have a severance tax. In the state of Texas, they have a 9% tax on natural gas that completely pays for education. This is our natural resource, and with regulation, better regulations than what we have right now. Right now we have the Halliburton loophole, which came about when Dick Cheney was the vice president and had substantial stock in Halliburton, and they passed what was called the Halliburton loophole, which means that natural gas does not have to adhere to many of the safeguards that conventional oil wells do. We need to reverse that. We need to have a super fund. They need to comply with the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act. All of those things can be done, and we can still tax it, and we still can use it for property tax relief and education and a myriad of things, because I read a Reuters report when I ran in 2012 that said over the course of 10 years, by not having and not enacting a severance tax, we will leave $24 billion of revenue on the table. I don't know about you, but I sit in Harrisburg and I see that $24 billion could be used for just a plethora of things like, I don't know, prison reform, opioid addiction, property tax relief, equitably funding schools. The list goes on and on and on. Thank you.
A pregnant woman facing the choice of her or her baby to live should have that choice. Ms. Madden?
Yes, absolutely. A woman has the right to make deeply personal decisions about her body. This was determined by the Supreme Court 40 years ago in Roe v. Wade, and I cannot believe 40 years later, as a legislator, I'm still fighting the same fight. Nobody has the right to tell a woman what to do with her body. My opponent voted for the 20-week abortion ban, even in the case of rape, incest, and fetal anomaly. They passed it in the House and the Senate this session, and of course, Governor Wolf is going to veto it. But we don't get more like-minded legislators like Claudette Williams, Adam Rodriguez, and Tarah Probst in Harrisburg. They will have the 2/3 majority to override it, and we will be back to illegal abortions and, back alleys and all of the things that people who came before me fought so hard to get rid of. Thank you.
And Mr. Parker?
In answer to the question, I've always supported and will support abortion to save the life of the mother and for the health of the mother. My opponent speaks about the bill that we passed. Now, I should ask, how many people here support the Roe v. Wade decision? Okay. So basically, the Supreme Court said that the unborn life, that's a viable life, has more value than the unborn life before viability. So what we did in the bill that we passed when I was in the House was update the law to say, look, back in the 70s, the viable life we determined started at 7 months. Well, science and medicine have taken us to a new level where we have babies surviving at 21 weeks outside the womb. And so we're recognizing that and saying, look, that's a viable life that deserves protection. So you still have 5 months to get an abortion for any reason you want, except gender selection. But elective abortion is still available for 5 months, and obviously during the last campaign I got a lot of phone calls from women who were concerned. It led to some good discussions. And one person said, I can't believe you're against abortion in all cases. And I said, the bill that we passed allows abortion up to 5 months. And she said, well, that's too long. I said, well, it allows that much time. So she's pro-choice, and she thought 5 months was excessive. One of the greatest comments I got was from a businesswoman in East Stroudsburg who told me, you know, she's been getting these horrible mailers about me, but she wants me to know they've led to some great family discussions. In fact, her son actually looked up the bill and read it, and he agreed with it. And he said, what the flyers say aren't accurate or an accurate description of what the bill does. In fact, 2/3 of Americans agreed that 5 months is a reasonable change to the law. So my opponent will try to count me as extreme. You know, she's going to send out these flyers telling that I'm extreme and against it in all cases. Every questionnaire I've answered about it, I've made exceptions for rape and incest. And again, everyone I've spoken to has said 5 months is long enough in those cases. And so, but we can look. Last election, they spent over $100,000 on this issue. That's my opponent's #1 issue. And she went down to Harrisburg, and 2 pro-life bills passed. She didn't do it. She put no amendments on it to address these concerns she's bringing up. She did nothing except push a red button and go to a press conference. So nothing was different. Nothing changed. So if you want somebody to go to Harrisburg and fight for the issues that are impacting Monroe County, school property taxes, school funding, send me back to Harrisburg. Thank you.
Next question, would you vote to increase the minimum wage? And we'll start with Mr. Parker.
Well, I'd have to see what the proposal is. I know there's been various ones, but I don't. We cannot and should update the minimum wage. One of the things that I was supporting when I was in office was an idea of allowing municipalities to rate. I mean, Pennsylvania is a big state, and we have a lot of different cost of living areas throughout the state. Even our legislative offices recognize that, so we have certain wage rates for this area. There's others for Philadelphia and others for northwestern PA. They vary throughout the state. So, you know, $10 here certainly doesn't go as far as it might go in even the Harrisburg area or Potter County or some other part of the state. And Philadelphia, it's even a higher cost of living. So a lot of folks from Philadelphia were asking about allowing Philadelphia to create their own minimum wage for that area. And I support that. So I would support an increase to it. I'd have to look at what we're talking about for it. But we got to remember, you know, the cost of living here is one price where there's other parts of the state where it's much lower. So to say, you know, we're going to make people in Potter County pay $15 an hour, it might really hurt that community. And it's a different cost of living out there than it is here. So we want to be sensitive to that and realize that the minimum wage would be geared to the lowest cost of living area in the state. I mean, that's what it's geared toward. So I would prefer to have economic growth, and this isn't even an issue because wages rise. And let's think about what the regular or the average wages. I want to see that wage go up, see more people making more money, be able to afford where they live, and let's cut costs. If we get property tax reform and school funding reform, it'll cost less to live here. But we all want to see economic growth, wages go up, and more people be able to thrive in our state and in our community.
Ms. Madden.
I just want to be really clear. On that mailer that you have, nowhere on that mailer does it say paid for by Friends of Maureen Madden. I believe it's paid for by Planned Parenthood. So that would be incorrect to say that I sent out that mailer. Yes, of course, we need an increase in the minimum wage. The minimum wage should be $15 an hour in this state and in this country. And I supported Representative Patty Kim's bill. And if we think it's going to put people out of business, then maybe we should expand the tax credit. There's a tax credit right now called PETA, and one of the new companies that moved into the area can pay a higher wage and write up and get a tax credit of up to $275,000 for paying people a wage that reflects the dignity of the work that they are doing. And that's what we need to do. Kalahari is not going to lose any money by paying $15 an hour. I promise you. About 3 weeks ago, I was at an event at Kalahari where they had a golf tournament and they were doling out $20,000 to the United Way, $20,000 to Habitat for Humanity, $20,000 to Family Promise. And of course, we always love when the companies that do business in Pennsylvania are philanthropic and help people. But I was thinking to myself as I was sitting there, if we paid people a living wage, how many of these nonprofits would we actually need? Right?
Yeah.
The mother whose door I knocked on, who works full-time making beds at Kalahari for $9.50 an hour, but still can't afford an apartment for her and her 2 children, and she's a single mom, and she lives at home with her mother, and despite that fact that she works 40 hours a week, she still qualifies for WIC. So she's going to pay her bills with her paycheck, and she's going to buy her milk and diapers with WIC. In the richest country in the world, that's a shame. Thank you. That's a shame. We need to pay people living wages. We need to keep unions strong because they are the line of protection between the haves and the have-nots, and that's what we're doing in this country. We're creating a society, a caste system of the haves and the have-nots, and it needs to end. And I will always support a minimum wage hike, and once we get that done, there should be a COLA as well. We don't hesitate to give ourselves in the legislature an increase every year and the best health insurance and the best retirement plan. Why are we any better than anybody else? Because you guys are paying for my salary and my benefits. And stop applauding because Barbara's getting mad at you.
Legislation that supports Governor Wolf's proposal to move combined reporting that would be an effective workaround to the Delaware loophole. Ms. Madden.
Yes, if we close the Delaware tax loophole, so it used to be, and I'm probably not going to remember this, corporations used to pay about 30% of our taxes. Encyclopedia Adam Rodriguez. Corporations used to account for 30% of our budget. Now they account for about 10? Okay. So if we would close the Delaware tax loophole, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a loophole that allows big box companies like Home Depot and Lowe's and any other big box stores to open up little offices, maybe half the size of this room in Delaware or other states where they don't have a state income tax, and say, hey, this is our corporate tax, and so they don't pay trademark taxes. It's the equivalent of Paul Manafort shipping all his money overseas, but in Pennsylvania. And we lose so much money if we would close the Delaware tax loophole, if we would cut the corporate net tax rate in half from 9.99% to 5%, if we would tax the natural gas drillers, we'd be sitting on about $4 billion in the in our general fund, wondering what phenomenal programs will we fund instead of stealing from Peter to pay Paul and trying every year taking money from the tobacco settlement fund and looking to sell the farm show building and all the other ridiculous things that we want to do. Last year, well, we passed the budget on time this year because it doesn't behoove anybody to have a budget battle on an election year, let's be serious. But the year before that, they actually were talking about You know how you go, these law firms will like give you a cash settlement for something that you're getting every year. The Republicans actually proposed that. Well, let's just cash out all of the tobacco settlement fund. We'll get somebody to give us all the money, and we'll use that to balance the budget. And one of my colleagues called Metzger Wickersham and asked if that would be something that they would even consider doing. And they said, absolutely not. It's the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard. So yeah, we have to start making really tough decisions. And corporations do have to pay their fair share. Thank you.
Mr. Parker.
So could you repeat the question?
Yes, and it was about the Delaware loophole. So there's a general fund budget with a deficit, and would you co-sponsor Governor Wolf's proposal to move combined reporting that would be an effective workaround for the Delaware loophole?
Right. Well, I'd have to look at it. I mean, I want us to pass budgets on time. I want them to be balanced, and we need to deal with the structural deficit. One of the other reasons I think we were able to balance the budget more quickly this year is because the economy is doing better, so revenues are a bit better, and that's one of the ways we can, I know it's not Monroe County, but statewide, the economy is doing better. In fact, Philadelphia is one of the fastest growing wage areas in the country. I read in a report recently. So, although things still are stagnant in the Poconos, and we're struggling here, there are other parts of the state that are doing well, and the state benefits with more income. I do support lowering our state income tax for businesses, for corporations, and I think you would realize more companies would declare their profits here. I mean, companies do. I mean, we talk about the big boxes and so on. They're headquartered in their home states, typically, but they do have to pay right on what they sell here. Now, there are, obviously, when you have a big corporation like that, you can move things around and so on. So I'm sure everybody takes full advantage of declaring profits wherever they can to get the best tax benefit. So if we get more competitive for business and bring more businesses here with a lower tax rate, more of our people will have more jobs, we'll have more businesses that want to locate here, and we can generate more revenue. So I want to create a better, fair climate in Pennsylvania for businesses, a fair tax system, so that we can compete with those other states. Thank you.
So we're running out of time for questions. We'll see how many. It asks, the writer says, the Electoral College is an archaic vestige from the Civil War to appease the South and suppress voting rights for elements of the population. Should it be abolished, and is it on the ballot? So we start with Mr. Parker.
I think we talked about that earlier. But, I don't think it's on the ballot that I know of, and I don't think we should abolish it.
Ms. Madden.
Yes, we should abolish it. The party in power is the party that benefits from it, and they're never going to put it on the ballot. It wouldn't be in our ballot, it's a federal issue, but as long as we have a Republican majority, it will never, never, never come up for a vote. Just like just like Darrell Metcalf will gut the Fair Districts bill because gerrymandering benefits one party. It's not equal, and it needs to be. People can vote, people are up on the issues. My God, the president tweets from the moment he wakes up till the moment he goes to bed at night. Is there anything you don't know in this country? So yeah, access is, to information is there for everybody. We could make a little better with broadband, but I digress.
Okay, let's sneak in one more if it could be quick like that. Okay, so this one asks, do Black Lives Matter? How can we as a society better protect Black lives? Ms. Madden.
Of course Black Lives Matter. We can stop incarcerating Black people at double the rate we incarcerate white people. We can stop saying really foolish things like, hey, the unemployment amongst Blacks is the lowest it's ever been. Well, that might be true, but that's because, people are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, because how can you make a living on $7.25 an hour? Black lives definitely matter, and it doesn't help that we have a president who defends white supremacists, who doesn't speak out you know, when black people are the victims of crime, and when we don't take a serious look at reforming the criminal justice system, which disproportionately affects black people. Thank you.
Mr. Parker?
Yes, of course Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. And
You do.
no more, you see that in our education funding. The way, if you look at how the formula, or excuse me, the money that's not being distributed under the formula distributes money, the groups that benefit the least are the ones with the highest minority populations. So even if you look at Monroe County, I mean, we have 2 school districts that are less than 50% white, and they're underfunded the most. Whereas the one that is the highest percentage white gets more than their fair share. So, all the more reason we need to fix school funding, get everyone their fair share, and we'll start to treat people equally. We'll get better education, and our taxes will go down. More people can afford to live here and raise a family, and it will help the black and Hispanic populations of Monroe County and of all of Pennsylvania, because they'll finally be treated fairly in how there's in education, and that will filter out throughout. But we need to treat everyone fairly. We need to certainly treat African Americans and Hispanics fairly. Thank you.
All right, I'm squeezing them in as long as we can. So the next one, do you approve of sanctuary cities in Pennsylvania? Yes or no, and why? Mr. Parker?
Okay. Well, I think we need to follow the laws. Cities need to protect their citizens and make sure that the people that live there are law-abiding citizens. I believe cities can determine that on their own, but I don't think they should become a sanctuary city. I have to really, my short answer would be no. Because it's very important that we protect the people that live in the cities, the citizens of Pennsylvania. So we want to be sure that we have law-abiding citizens living there, and you know, the immigrants that live there are abiding by the laws.
Ms. Madden?
The short answer is yes. The explanation is, we didn't hear a lot about sanctuary cities before Lou Barletta passed a law in Hazleton saying that, you know, if you sell cigarettes to an illegal immigrant, we're going to put you in jail, or if you rent to an illegal immigrant, we're going to put you in jail. And he started this law, which really was, it was almost like he anticipated Donald Trump, and he did it to, you know, to find a clear path to Washington. And now he's going to lose in a big way to Bob Casey, and then we'll be done with him. But yes, because our immigration system is so lopsided and is so unfair. We are the country that said, bring us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. France loved us so much they gave us the Statue of Liberty because we were a beacon of hope, that shining city on the hill. And I'm quoting a Republican, the last Republican, who had a comprehensive immigration system that allowed 10 million illegal immigrants to stay in this country through a path towards citizenship. Not sending them back home and making them get to the back of line, but recognizing that people who would swim, who would crawl through, you know, miles and miles of, you know, exactly, to get here and paid taxes and worked and did the jobs. When I lived in California, when I was 19 years old, I had a friend whose dad was quite wealthy and he owned avocado groves, and he would pay us $10 an hour. We're talking the late 70s, the same amount that he paid the immigrants. And they didn't want to stay here. They wanted to follow the harvest, and they wanted to make that money, and then they wanted to go home. But they would have gladly gotten a social security number and paid taxes. And there weren't many things I agreed with George W. on, but I agreed that we should have allowed immigrants to come to this country and work the fields and give them social security numbers, because some of them lived close enough that they could have gone home at the end of the day. You know, so I agreed with him on that, and I agreed with him on his overwhelming empathy and support for AIDS victims in Africa. Oh, sorry, got off topic.
So we'll have to leave some questions unasked, and we've run out of time for the questions from the audience. We're going to move into closing statement, and we'll start with Mr. Parker.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the League for having this event today, and thanks everyone for coming. This past summer, my family and I took a day and went to the beach on the New Jersey shore. We haven't had a vacation in over 5 years, ever since before Izzy was born. Because we've made the sacrifice, and I've been focusing on serving this community as a state representative and running to be a state representative. And so finally we took that day, and we had a great day. As we were there, enjoying the time, I saw somebody coming out of the water, and he looked very familiar. It turns out it was a representative from Pennsylvania who was there, and so I reintroduced myself. I served with you last term in the State House. My name's David Parker, so I remember who you are. We miss you down there. And I introduced him to my wife, and we had a great conversation. And then as I left, I was talking with my wife, and she said, well, who was that? I said, oh, it's a representative from Western Pennsylvania. He's a Democrat out west. And she said, he's a Democrat and he misses you? I said, well, yeah, I had a good relationship with lots of Democrats in Harrisburg. The issues that we face, school taxes, school funding reform, they affect all of us, Democrats and Republicans. It's not a partisan issue. And that's the way I conducted myself when I was in the House. I focused on solutions for Monroe County, working together with Democrats and Republicans to get those solutions. And probably one of the greatest things about losing, although it's not good to lose, but we lost the last election, as you know. But I got to give a farewell speech to the entire House chamber from the Speaker's podium, and just share my experience and thank those who helped us get things done. Of course, last forum I was criticized for thanking a chairman who had a hearing on my bill, but I thanked all the chairmen who had hearings on my bills because that was important. But many people just complimented me on my speech. They appreciated it. In fact, when I visited Harrisburg a few months later, I was just standing with a Democratic legislator, and he just said, he's been there 10 years and seen tons of speeches, but he thinks mine was the best speech he ever heard. Because I'm about bringing people together to solve problems. We've got to put our partisanship aside. My opponent has spent much of this time here today criticizing Republicans at the state and federal level, pushing our party's agenda. I want to go to Harrisburg to push an agenda to help Monroe County. I won't always be in lockstep with my party. Certainly not. I stood up against them on school funding and other issues because I want to do what's best for our area. And that requires working together. So it's so important for me to get back to Harrisburg. We've seen nothing being done on advancing the school funding issue, of getting our county their fair share. There's a bill out, there's a couple bills out here and there, but they're not in play, they're not being pushed. The 115th district is in a unique position. All of our school districts are being harmed by the current situation. So it's a great seat to be in, and you can advocate for that and not worry about other constituents, because we're all going to benefit when we get this done. And that's why I want to run for state representative again. I want to get back down to Harrisburg. I need your help to do it, but we need someone down there who's actually going to work on this. I'm not about just talking, I'm about working and getting solutions. And I will introduce my legislation again and keep pushing the issue every chance I get, because everybody knows what I'm about. The governor knows this is my issue. All the other representatives know when they see David Parker, it's about school funding and property tax reform. So please, on November 6th, send me back to Harrisburg so I can do that work for you and get Monroe County its fair share. Thank you.
And now, Ms. Madden.
Well, I have spent a great deal of time criticizing the Republicans. They've been in the party in power for decades. Do you know that I am the third Democrat behind John Sibtroth and Joe Battisto elected to the state legislature in about 40 years?
Wow.
Yeah. So we have an uphill battle, and definitely doesn't get done in one term. But as I mentioned, I criticize the Republicans because they are the party in power, and we rank 65 out of 67 counties in Monroe County. We have a very large poverty rate at almost 15%. The poverty rate in Stroudsburg and Coolba is 20%. And those legislators who have been in power the longest are not even here to defend their records, and I really wish the league would change their policy on that. I went to Harrisburg and I did everything that the voters asked me to do when they voted for me in 2016 and sent Dave back to Monroe County. I voted for a raise in the minimum wage. I voted for Representative Chris Rabb's equitable funding bill. I came up with a property tax reduction bill that funds it properly, that is fair, that we can get other legislators on board with who don't necessarily face our property tax burden. And when I sat in Governor Wolf's office and we discussed this, he said, your bill, Maureen, is a lot like mine, except I think yours is a little better, and when and if it comes to my desk, I will sign it. Let's be honest. Dave Parker is in the majority when he was in Harrisburg and he couldn't get it done. I'm in the minority. I have a bill right now that would strengthen unions, make it easier to join a union, in which all of the unions are coming to a press conference on Tuesday. I currently have 59 co-sponsors. My prime co-sponsor is a Republican, and right now I have 4 Republican co-sponsors on my bill. If that's not bipartisanship, I don't know what is. I have gone to Harrisburg and I have fought for women's rights. I've fought for education. I've fought for wages. I've fought against special interests. And it's not my fault that Planned Parenthood agrees with me and disagrees with Dave Parker. So you know what? Send me back in 2018 and let me continue doing the job that I have been doing, working in a bipartisan way, calling out the people who don't help us lift ourselves out of poverty, and just generally working every day for you. Thank you so much, and I would appreciate your vote on November 16th. Just can't talk.
I'd like to give both candidates a hand at this point. Go ahead and applaud. Since we've been holding you back, you can applaud both